Today's lesson is called Horizontal and Vertical Lines in the Coordinate Plane. We want to introduce ways to describe vertical lines, ones that are parallel to the y-axis, and horizontal lines, ones that are parallel to the x-axis, using equations. So obviously vertical lines, if they're parallel to the y-axis, would be straight up and down, so pointing up, pointing down. And horizontal ones, which would be parallel to the x-axis, would be ones that go left and right. So as an opening activity to introduce you to this idea, I would like you to complete exercise 1 by yourself, pause the video, try parts A, B, and C, and then resume the video to go over your answers. Okay, now that you had a chance to try by yourself, let's look at exercise 1. A vertical line is shown graphed below. 4 points are marked along the line. So you can see them labeled A, B, C, and D. So in part A, write down the coordinates of each of the points. A should have been at 4, 8, B is at 4, 5, C is at 4, 0, and D is at 4, negative 3. So what is common amongst all the points you wrote down? Well, all the X values actually end up being equal to 4. 4, 8, 4, 5, 4, 0, 4, negative 3. So that actually tells us the equation of the line. What equation could you use to describe all points that lie on this vertical line? Your equation is x equals 4. You have a variable, you have an equal sign, and you technically have written an equation. No matter what coordinate you pick off of that line, the x value will always be a 4. So now let's move on and look at some other exercises together. So in exercise 2, it says a horizontal line is shown graphed below along with 4 marked points. So very similar to the one you did on your own. It says write down the coordinates of all 4 points. So we'll start with A. If I take a look at the coordinate for A ends up being at negative 4, 7. B is at 0, 7. C is at 2, 7, and D ends up being at 6, 7. So question B says, what would be a good equation to describe this line based on A? So it doesn't ask you the same exact questions as before. Last time they asked you to find what was common amongst all the points. We still have to do that, though, in order to be able to write the equation that they're asking us for in part B. So even though it's not listed as a step, that should be the next thing that you think about in your head. So look at your 4 coordinates. What do you notice is common to all of them? This y value of 7 is popping up repeatedly, which means the equation for this line should be y equals 7. So then on the same grid, they would like us to graph the line y equals 2. So if y equals 2, that means y is always a 2. One way to be able to graph this accordingly is to make an XY table and almost think of it like auto-filling the y side. If we know y is equal to 2, we know that it's always equal to 2. So I'll write a few of them down. And then as you can see from our example in part A, it doesn't matter what the x's are. So I'll do negative 3, I'll do 0, I'll do 4. Okay, so then I can graph these points. Negative 3, 2. 0, 2, 4, 2. Obviously, using the one above as a model, we know y equals line should be horizontal. Another way you can kind of start to learn about this and kind of memorize and know how to graph them is if it says y equals 2, we got to know it's going to be a horizontal line. And that it's going to cross the y-axis at 2. And the last thing we need on our picture is just the equation, y equals 2, to represent that on our graph. So this way, we were kind of looking at lines that were already graphed to figure out what their equations were, and now we see a brief introduction into how we should graph them. So moving on, it says horizontal and vertical lines One, horizontal lines are going to be parallel to the x-axis, so they have equations that are always going to be y equals a constant. Remember, constant just means number. So if you're horizontal, which means you're parallel to x, your equation is y equals a number. Vertical lines are parallel to the y-axis and have equations of the form x equals a constant or a number. All right, so think of some tricks and tips and things that you can do to help you kind of memorize that. And obviously, one of them is what we've kind of already witnessed. Pick points off the line, make a table, auto-filling whatever side is appropriate in order to come up with either the equations or the graphs. So in exercise 3, it says on the grid below, graph and label each of the following lines. Graphing tip, write out 2 or 3 points that fit the equation, plot them, and connect with a line. So I'm going to add here that you can use a table for this. Now, can you write the coordinates like you did, let's say, back here in part A? Absolutely. If you want to write the coordinates that way, please continue to do so. But you can also organize those coordinates, as we've talked about in previous lessons, in a table. So if I see that x equals 3, I'm going to make a quick xy table. And if x is 3, x is always 3. I'm going to autofill that side with 3s. It doesn't matter what the y values are. So I picked -1, 1, and 4. So now I can go over to the graph and plot those points. 3, -1, 3, 1, and 3, 4. And now I can see that it makes a vertical line that crosses the x-axis at 3, and we'll label it with x equals 3. Let's do part B. Okay, so very similar. It's another x equals. So we'll make our table. X equals -6. I'm going to autofill this side with -6s. And once again, it doesn't matter what my y's will be. So you can pick any y's you want. I picked -2, 0, and 2. So that when I go plot them, I've got -6, -2. I've got -6, 0, and I have -6, 2. So once again, very similar to my other x equals line, which is how it should be, I have a vertical line crossing the x-axis at -6, and I'll label it with its equation, x equals -6. So already thinking ahead, now that we're seeing that the x equals lines, remember, are the vertical ones, we know these two last ones, the y equals, are definitely going to be horizontal. And picking up from what we saw before, if x equals 3, we saw that it crossed the x-axis at 3. So one way you could graph y equals 4 is to know that it's going to cross the y-axis at 4. So we'll continue to make our tables and autofill here. If y is equal to 4, y is always 4. So we'll do about 3 points. Then once again, it doesn't matter what the x's are, so I can make those up. -5, 1, and 4 is what I chose here. So -5, 4 is right there. 1, 4 right here. 4, 4 right here. So as we said, it's a horizontal line crossing the y-axis at 4, and then I write the equation y equals 4 on the line. Okay, then we have y equals -8. So again, we'll make our little table. We'll autofill it here. Y is -8 means y is always -8. Doesn't matter what my x's are, so I picked -3, -1, and 2 this time, just to show you that it's not going to mess you up if you pick different than I do, and if you pick different each time. So -3, -8 is down here. -1, -8, 2, -8. So it's making a horizontal line that's crossing the y-axis at -8. And so we'll label it with the equation y equals -8. Okay, so that's kind of a nice example of all the graphing. And for our last exercise, exercise 4, we'll practice going the other way. Okay, 4 lines are graphed and labeled below. So they're already graphed for us, labeled A, B, C, and D. For each, state whether it is horizontal or vertical, plot 2 points on the line and state their coordinates, and give the equation of the line. So If I look at A, which is over here, I see that it's a vertical line. So I'm going to pick 2 points on that line. I happen to pick 7, 3, and 7, -2. So 7, 3, and then 7, -2. So now that I wrote those 2 down, I see the thing they have in common is x equals 7. So my equation is x equals 7. Let's look at B. B's over here. B is horizontal. I'm going to pick 2 points off that one. So I happened to do 0, 6 here. And then I did -8, 6 over here. So my coordinates are -8, 6 and 0, 6. So the thing they have in common is the y equals 6. So my equation is y equals 6. We'll go to part C, or line C, I should say, is right there. So we see it's vertical. I had to pick 2 points, so I picked -5, 3, and then I picked -5, -9. So -5, 3, and then -5, -9. And I see the thing they have in common is -5 and -5, so I know it's x equals -5 for my equation. Then for D, over here, I see that it's horizontal. And so I picked 2 points. I picked 1, -4, and then I picked 4, -4. So 1, -4, and then 4, -4. So again, looking at the coordinate, I see this is what they have in common. That's a y value. So the equation is y equals -4. And so that was us practicing how to actually write the equations of the lines that are already graphed. So this concludes your lesson on horizontal and vertical lines in the coordinate plane.